Morning, how are you? It's Cristo here on Talk TV. It's a Saturday morning. Looks like it's going to be quite a scorcher this morning, so that means we're all going to die. Remember, if you read any of the newspapers last week or in the last few weeks, we are in catastrophe. It's all awful. There are going to be wildfires and everything's absolutely dreadful. Some of the front pages are going with the drought this morning. Some of them have gone with the horrific story about Salman Rushdie. Someone who's been taking a look at them for us is the leading criminal defence lawyer, founder of Britton and Time, Paul Britton. Morning to you, Paul.
Good morning, Cristo.
Thanks for taking the time to come in this morning. By the way, some of you are also calling about Eurovision cities. And if you want to call about Salman Rushdie or anything else that you're hearing about this morning, or challenge anything you're hearing, as always, you are more than welcome to do so. What is Britton and Time?
Britton and Time is a law firm in Brighton and Mayfair that specialises in criminal defence work. Is one of our areas, and I'm one of the solicitors there that deals with that sort of work.
And so, obviously, most of my lawyer friends, they're a little bit worried at the moment for the state of the law industry when it comes to people being able to mount defences and legal aid and all of those sorts of things. Is that something that is a big concern of yours?
Well, we're a privately funded firm, so we don't rely on the legal aid system. But it has been in the papers. As you know, the barristers that do legal aid have been striking, and what's happened over the last 2 or 3 decades is an erosion of what solicitors and barristers get paid by legal aid. I mean, one of the examples I'll give you, Cristo, is you might put in a bill, say you phoned your client 3 times in one particular day, and you've claimed the maximum you can claim for those telephone calls. Legal aid will then go through your bill and say, why did you call your client 3 times that day? And you might say, well, the case evolved, it moved forward, I had to speak to him or her. And they'll say, well, we're only paying you for 1 call. So not only are they paying you as little as they can for those calls, because they won't pay you on what is a traditional hourly basis, what solicitors charge, they will then strip out your bill and run you down even more. And I think that although they're striking now, the time to really strike would have probably been the 90s and the noughties, when things started to go the way of not paying lawyers for the work that they were doing. And the knock-on effect, of course, is that those accused of serious crimes or any crime are not getting the defence that they deserve, and arguably it's perverting the course of justice in terms of there are more people being found guilty of crimes when they could have been innocent.
But, I mean, and that is because there are still certain circumstances. If you're accused of a big crime, you do get legal aid, don't you?
It's the legal aid system that's the problem.
But what you're saying is that even though you might get legal aid, the lawyer might think, well, oh God, I can't call that client again, or I can't spend as much time on this case because I basically won't get paid for it.
Well, that's right. So you might want to speak to various witnesses, and then if you don't use that evidence that you've got from a particular witness, they will say, well, we're not paying you for that, it's unused material.
So but how do you know whether it's going to be used or not unless you've spoken to the person? You haven't got... That's
the point, isn't it?
Yeah. That's interesting, isn't it?
It's a real travesty what's happened in with the legal aid system in this country.
Let's move to another travesty, because many of the front pages, I think pretty much all of them, apart from I think the Eye, even though even the other newspapers that aren't going for it on their main story, they've got it as their banner story or another aspect of their front page. They're going for this just horrific stabbing of Salman Rushdie. I mean, allegedly they have this alleged suspect who is being held at the moment. He looked like he was a heavy-set individual, probably looking like influenced by the extremist threats against Salman Rushdie, which have been knocking about for over 3 decades now. What do you make of this story?
Well, it's all from Salman Rushdie's book Satanic Verses, which came out in 1988. At the time, it was criticised by some. It's not the only difficulty that's come from that book. In 1991, I think the Japanese translator of the book was murdered, and the Italian translator of the book was attacked in Italy, in Milan. So it has been hanging around for a long time, these threats against him. And when he was in Britain, he had protection. but now he lives in the States, and I think he's been trying to live more of a normal life, and unfortunately that's caught up with him, and we've now got this man in custody that's allegedly have stabbed him between 10 and 15 times. There was an update this morning. He's likely to lose an eye. He's had severed tendons in his arm.
Stabbed in the liver, some of them.
And the liver was
well.
the third thing. But he's, for all intents and purposes, expected to make a recovery.
But, I mean, this is an awful example of yet another attack on free speech. And don't we need to start to get our head around the fact that look, there are people who are of the I mean, look, we don't know the full details, we don't know for sure the full motivations of the person that has carried this out, and I think it's important to point this out, but there have been so many examples in recent years of extremism within the Islamic faith, and that does not mean to say that that most people of the Islamic faith happen to agree with Islamism, with the extremism that has been displayed here, but there is an issue regarding free speech and those with the extremist tendencies within Islam, and we need to start to acknowledge that that's a problem, because we've seen it here in the UK. We've seen it with the protests about the lessons in schools which merely mentioned the existence of gay people. We've seen it in the school in Batley when the picture of the Prophet Muhammad was shown as part of a lesson on free speech, ironically, and how some people get offended. Well, I mean, you couldn't have demonstrated that any better than the reaction that we saw after that. We've seen it with the movie Our Lady in Heaven, where Cineworld and various cinemas had to just basically withdraw the movie because of baying mobs that were outside. We've seen it with Salman Rushdie previously to this attack, the threats that he has lived under. You know, we've seen this countless times. We've seen a more extreme version of it with Charlie Hebdo and what happened in Paris. And we need to start getting our head around this happening and start to try and address this. Would you agree with that?
There's so much in that, Cristo. Where do I start? Yes, I mean, you are right. Extremism is a problem in the UK, but it's not just in Islamic faith. It bleeds over into a lot of areas of life. Politicians are a good example. When they attend events to give talks, they're heckled or, as we know, attacked. And one was murdered just last year. We have,
but that was by an Islamic extremist.
Well, yeah, a constituent. But there was also other factors involved in that case, mental health issues as well. So I don't know if it can be straight away attributed to an Islamic extremist. I actually think there's probably more to play in that story. But I mean, you're right. We have to decide what we're going to allow, what is okay, what is freedom of speech, and how are we going to present that in our schools, in particular, the examples that you gave.
I mean, because what I find staggering about a story like this is I should be able to, I won't because I'm not an unkind person, I try not to be, but I wouldn't hesitate if there was an editorial justification to hold up a cartoon of Jesus if I wanted to. Again, it wouldn't be particularly maybe a nice thing to do. There might be people who are of the Christian faith that would be offended by it, but I wouldn't hold that up and fear for my safety. But I couldn't do that with a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad. I just simply could not do that because I would be in danger. My life would be in danger.
Yeah.
Why are we allowing that? Why do we allow that? Why are we in a situation where that is something that we all accept?
I haven't got the answer to that. I think these things start in schools, don't they, and with education. And the thing is that Salman Rushdie's book is a prime example of two immigrants or foreigners coming to the UK for a better life, and talking about the difficulties about integration into society and into culture, into British life. And I think what we do need to think about is how are we going to, at the very early start, when we have children and people are young, educating them into what is right and what is not, and what is wrong, and what extremism is. Perhaps even in the syllabus, maybe schools should start teaching this and including it in.
But then when a school tries to, the teacher ends up having to go into hiding. I mean, the teacher was actually doing a lesson to primary school children about just that, about what is free speech, what is offensive, what is acceptable. And I think it was in the context of Charlie Hebdo and all of the controversy around that. I mean, probably not the wisest move from an offence point of view, but that teacher has never been able to come out hiding.
Well, we have got one school as an example out of all the schools over the UK, and I don't think it's fair or proportionate to say that all the schools are like that in the UK. It is just one example.
Yeah, but but what I'm saying is that in order to solve the problem, they should be able, all schools in the UK should be able to have lessons to say that this kind of thing, but we're almost hamstrung about being able to solve the problem, because if we were to attempt to, by saying, well, look, you know, this is what people find offensive and this is why it's found offensive, there would be baying mobs outside the schools, so therefore schools aren't able to function and do
teach.
that. So the problem is, my fear is it's never going to get solved. And actually, the people who probably suffer most about it then is people who are of the Islamic faith, who actually don't want to restrict a massive amount of freedom of speech, or are able to turn a blind eye and say, well, look, I'm not going to want to draw a cartoon or look at it myself, but I get that other people might want to, because then they end up being tarred with the same brush as those people who have extremist views, and so therefore it actually does them a disservice too, I think.
It's a difficult subject, isn't it? I mean, even now, I'm thinking, what can I and what can I not say on air with you? And I think you're probably there as well. Almost, it's the example of.
Be.
Yeah, what can we say?
We shouldn't be, and I'll return to the point. I should be able to, in this country,
speak freely,
and you know,
and challenge ideas.
Yeah, and also hold up a picture. If I wanted to hold up a picture or a cartoon from the Charlie Hebdo and say, well, look at this, and you know, and actually maybe to hold it up to say.
But why would you? You wouldn't, would you?
I might want to hold it up to say it's wrong. I might want to hold it up and say, look, I actually think that I want to show you this for context, and this is the reason, because it was actually a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad being shown as a terrorist. So it was a quite crude thing to do, but I should be able to hold it up, and if I want to give my opinion that it's wrong, I should even be able to do that, but I couldn't even do that.
Yeah, and that's the problem, isn't it? So you can't highlight an issue, and you can't say that I think this is wrong, and because there's also the fear that it's going to be taken out of context. Someone gets a still of you, puts you on social media, and then you're demonised despite taking it out of context and what you actually said in relation to what you were holding up.
It's a crazy story, and literally in 20 minutes' time, actually, we're going to be crossing live stateside to find out the latest on the condition of Salman Rushdie and exactly what has been going on there. We might lighten the mood. I never thought I'd say this, but we might lighten the mood and talk about drought when we come back, and look at some of the stories about that as we are live from the Talk Radio studio. This is Talk TV.